Hey guys, GPE Jesus here, and today we're going to be covering the Phillips curve model. So what is this Phillips curve all about? The Phillips curve shows the inverse relationship between unemployment rate, which is on the x-axis, and inflation rate, which is on the y-axis. This was found by a guy named William Phillips, who analyzed data and found that previously when unemployment rates were higher, interest rates tended to be lower, while when unemployment rate was lower, interest rates tended to be higher. So what can change inflation or unemployment rates? That would be price level and GDP, and there's a graph for that, which is the aggregate supply and demand model, which you'll often need when doing changes to the Phillips curve. And one really important thing to realize is that GDP being higher than potential means that unemployment rate is lower. While if GDP is lower than potential, then unemployment rate is higher. Burn that into your memory. So knowing from its inverse relationship, we can then draw a downward sloping Phillips curve. We can call this the short run Phillips curve, or SRPC. There's also the long run Phillips curve, which we'll call LRPC. And LRPC is a vertical line, with the bottom being the natural rate of unemployment. You'll have to label and usually call it NRU. And if we recall from Unit 2, natural rate of unemployment is made of both structural and frictional unemployment. So if any of those change, then LRPC will also shift. We mostly won't encounter that in this unit. And so that's essentially how you draw a basic Phillips curve. And take a look at this. Doesn't this look a little bit similar to a previous graph? That's right. It looks just like the money market graph. And one small tip is to write UR on the x-axis or IR on the y-axis if the curve is not at long-run equilibrium. Now be careful, because unlike other models, as we can see right here, the short-run equilibrium isn't always where LRPC and SRPC intersect. That's only where the long-run equilibrium is. But in fact, short-run equilibrium is found by either knowing the inflation or unemployment rate. For an example of an inflationary gap, let's say this IR we have from earlier is equal to 8%. Now we go from this 8% to the SRPC curve and then down to employment. And as we can see, this is where the short-run equilibrium is. So that's how you find short-run equilibriums that are not in long-run equilibrium. But more common questions you'll probably see on Phillips curves involve asking how it looks if the economy is in a recessionary gap or an inflationary gap. So let's get into that. And here's a general rule. If the economy is in a recession, know that to the right of the LRPC curve is where the recession will be. This whole section is where recessions will land. So recession for right. Meanwhile, in an inflationary gap, inflation is high and unemployment is low. We already drew this earlier, and inflationary gaps will generally be to the left of the LRPC curve. And so that's generally how you can answer types of questions that will ask on how the economy looks during a recession or inflationary gap. You'll definitely see that in an AP exam. So now let's go into the more trickier part, which is changes in aggregate demand or aggregate supply on the Phillips curve. And so I've developed a sort of mnemonic acronym for this, which is DMs aren't going your way, and note the two double S's. Let's debunk DMSS first. So D stands for demand / aggregate demand, while M stands for move. The first S stands for supply / SRAS, and the last S stands for shift, which means that changes in aggregate demand invokes movements along the Phillips curve, while changes in aggregate supply leads to shifts in the short-run Phillips curve. Let's see that in action for demand moving. If aggregate demand shifts to the left, then unemployment will increase and interest rates will decrease. So it'll move along the curve downward like this. That's my first time animating, so don't judge. And this brings us to our next point on what direction will it move or shift. If we look back to our mnemonic, DMs aren't going your way. They'll never go your way. Meaning, let's say you have your short-run aggregate supply here, and it shifts to the left, then the short-run Phillips curve won't go that same way. It'll go the opposite way. It'll go to the right. Let's do a different example. If the government implements some fiscal policy and aggregate demand shifts to the right, then short-run Phillips curve won't go that same way, and it'll move from long-run equilibrium position to a leftward short-run equilibrium position. Just know that DMs aren't going your way. Here's an example of a C-gang disciple with my Discord DMs not going my way. So that's the main points you really need to know about the Phillips curve. It really isn't that hard. I'll upload another Phillips curve FRQ later on, as practice is the key to proficiency. So let's summarize what we just learned. For a Phillips curve, inflation is on the y-axis, while unemployment rate is on the x-axis. And since there's an inverse relationship, it goes downward. LRPC shows the natural rate of unemployment, which is only affected by frictional and structural unemployment. And if you're ever in doubt when trying to draw this graph and you forget how it looks, just think of the money market graph. Know that recessions are on the right, while inflationary gaps are on the left. And all in all, just know that your Discord DMs aren't going your way. Sad face. If that video was useful or you got an A on the test, then consider subscribing, and dislike if it was useless. Hopefully you enjoy this new format, as it's a lot more time consuming, but I hope it's worth it. GPA Jesus signing out. I died for your grades.